Welcome to the Supply Chain Pioneers podcast, where we highlight industry leaders on the forefront of innovation and technology in planning, procurement, and logistics. Hosted by your supply chain pro to know, Ulf Venn.
Supply Chain Pioneers is powered by Everstream Analytics. Everstream gives you the predictive insights and analytics to make your supply chain faster, smarter, safer, and leaner. Go to everstream.ai to book your demo today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Supply Chain Pioneers. And with me today is Jim DeVries, who is a founder and managing partner of Enhance International Group and so many other ventures, including being the Chief Strategy Officer of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. And with that, hello, Jim.
Hello, it's an honor to be here. I really appreciate the time to speak with you and just reminisce about some old times about supply chain risk management.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that as well. My favorite topic. So before we get started, Jim, why don't you quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my background is engineering, mechanical, electrical, nuclear engineering. Grew up at GE under Jack Welch. I'm a Welchian guy. Then I started consulting in 2000. He quit, I quit GE. And I started consulting Lean Six Sigma deployments, actually the first deployment being in Cologne with Ford Motor Company, oddly enough, and really enjoyed Cologne there. And then just kept consulting and doing global deployments for different companies, Tyco, Air Products, just a number of companies from Merrill Lynch to New York Times, just a lot of varied experiences. And then I really started getting into supply chain risk management really back in 2005 with Greg Schlegel. We met at a conference and we're still talking to each other after 20 years.
Now, that's a long relationship for sure. And it's great to see that you have been in Cologne, one of my favorite cities in Germany and the one I live in. And I'm very close to the Ford plant, so that's cool. But yeah, let's get into medias res, as a Latin guy would say, or let's dive deep into it. You had a really long road ahead of you before really going into the topic of supply chain, which is the focus of this podcast, right? So you started in engineering, you moved to sales and consulting and had a lot of different topics that you kind of worked on. What were things that especially you learned from engineering and then also sales that helped you build some of the fundamental skills that you could apply in any field, frankly?
Yeah, I think my background is worked in as tool and die shop, worked on the floor of a factory, used to draw illustrations for NCR, making cash registers and ATMs. And so I had quite a varied background, even by the time I left college. And my last job was in research and development. So I'd already seen a lot of different aspects, and then you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together and of an ecosystem to say, how do companies work? And I think I was always fascinated in that. And then the great experience at General Electric, going through the nuclear operations program from an operations perspective, and then working in customer service. And I would say working in customer service at GE Power Systems back in the late 80s, early 90s, and then opening up Asia was very instrumental in my background because you got to see everything. I was working with manufacturing. We had to serve the customer. And I was the line of defense between the customer and the factory. So if something went wrong, or the parts weren't shipped right, or the plant wasn't running, or they had to re-up and operate the plant, what do you do to service the plant? They called our department. And I think that was probably the most influential position I had to change my overlook of supply chain. So I was actually we didn't call it supply chain then, but working in customer service and then opening up Asia and us building a lot of plants in Asia at that time in the late 90s, early 90s, and then doing the same in the US in the late 90s. We had to get all these plants up and running, and we had to make sure that they were maintained and operating, so that you have to have somewhat of a supply chain there. Supply chain, again, wasn't a word back then. It didn't exist. And then in 2000, when I started consulting companies, I was fascinated when these people started talking about supply chain. What is that? And Greg and I would talk at conferences. He was doing his thing on optimizing plants, using a Cray computer, which I thought was pretty cool, using probabilistic stochastic analysis. I'd used probabilistic stochastic analysis in evaluating power plants on whether they can operate or not. So we kind of had that in common. And then supply chain came up, SCORE came up. And then in 2010, supply chain started being real popular. Supply chain risk management. Greg and I were talking about that back in 2007, 2008, I believe. We used to meet and say, how do we get supply chain risk management off and running? Because nobody had heard of it back then. And there were a few books on it. And then Greg made his book in 2015. And I basically had, because I think I've been reading up about supply chain risk management, the last company I was with, we really pushed supply chain risk management principles. And as I read through the book, I said, Greg, I hate to burst your bubble, but this is exactly what we did at our last company. Was we didn't call it supply chain risk management, but the principles were all incorporated in what I was doing in my last role there. So over the years, again, in the last 4 or 5 years, Greg and I got together and I said, Greg, I think I can help you. So that's when I started playing more the role of Chief Strategy Officer for the consortium. Kind of long-winded, but that's the story.
Yeah. But coming back to, you mentioned already, right? If you look at taking the engineering skills that you learned very early on, right? It built a mutual understanding about how to use probabilistic and anything statistical, right? But then I think if you think about your sales skills and your customer service skills, that kind of outward nature and the ability to communicate, were there skills that you then also could use in other roles later on?
Oh, for sure. I was bouncing between customer service and sales for about 7 or 8 years at GE. They didn't know where to put. I worked really well as the technical expert, because I could hang with them, so to speak, technically. But at the same time, I was pretty good at bringing in sales. I brought in record number of sales, but I was very good at helping other people bring in sales too. Even from a marketing perspective, when they opened up marketing for a brief time, they asked me to do marketing. So I think I always was bouncing around those 3 roles at General Electric for about 8 years. And then when you combine the skills of being a Lean Six Sigma black belt, then a master black belt, and then an executive master black belt, you learn to sell. So anybody who says, if you're a master black belt, you don't know how to sell, I'm sorry, you're not a master black belt. Because all you do is sell Lean Six Sigma and those principles to the company. And believe me, it's one of the most difficult roles to do. Because you're asking somebody who's got a full-time job, they don't have enough time to do anything, spend time to be proactive in their role. And everybody, the ambulance chasers, are the people that rise to the top. So they said, you mean if I should be doing something proactive? If I do something proactive, there's nothing to chase, then nobody will notice me. So wouldn't it be better just to be an ambulance chaser? Then I can get known by management. And the great thing at GE is Jack Welch hated ambulance chasers. But you need a leader like that to say, you're not going to get rewarded for that type of work. Because a lot of people create the fire and then put it out and then say, I'm a great leader. And a lot of companies are run like that instead of the leaders that are proactive and remove the barriers. And I think that's what was unique about what Jack Welch did with GE at those times. He made sure company was delayered, no fight between silos. If there was a fight between the silo, both of the people that were fighting lost. Those people were out. And they said to Neutron Jack, yeah, those are the people that lost their jobs if they did not change. And it was a 3-strike rule like anything else. He didn't fire people making a single mistake.
Yeah. And I love how you talk about, for me personally, right, just sales is often not about really selling something, but more about getting people to change behaviors
Yes.
and do something better and maybe more efficiently. And I think that's something you embodied quite well.
It's
as
all about
well.
relationships and trust, right? It's all about sales is my bet because I had the opportunity to work with some of the best salespeople in the world. And because I'm deploying Lean Six Sigma in the sales organization. So you find out, you go, Harry's the best sales guy. Actually, Harry was the number one sales guy for like 10, 15 years at GE. And it's like, well, what was different about Harry? He was relationship. He didn't sell short term. He sold relationships, and everybody wanted to be with Harry. And you talk about all the great salespeople, they were always, everybody wants to be with Harry or Sally or whoever it is.
Yeah. But you already mentioned a little bit a few steps in your career that came later, right? From engineering and sales at GE, you then moved into a new topic, which is operational excellence. And there you touched a lot more on supply chains and got to know a lot more than before. Before you were like on the customer facing side, looking into supply chains, and then operational excellence, you actually were optimizing supply chains as part of the role.
Yeah. So I was one of the first to implement Lean Six Sigma in sales and in what we call supply chain now at GE in the late 90s. So when clients came up and they needed help, they wanted to implement Lean Six Sigma principles in those areas, I would be at the top of the pick for that. And from the deployment perspective. So we would do end to end. I've done manufacturing simply because manufacturing would come up and then I'd be down on the floor. But honestly, the transactional and sales world and supply chains worlds to me are much more interesting than a factory floor. No offense to the people on the factory floor, but I find it much more rewarding and interesting working with folks to get them to do what they don't want to do and make them feel good about it, that's what it's all about. Because there's a lot of change management, in the supply chain world and in sales world, because you're trying to convince a person who sells. Think about it. You're trying to convince a person who's selling every day. What's their job? Their job is to convince them to buy the product. So you're selling to a salesperson. That is one of the hardest jobs in the world.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. But most salespeople would look at Lean Six Sigma people in disdain. And again, building trust with salespeople was always my goal. I always had a lot of fun with it. And being an ex-salesperson certainly helped me get my foot in the door.
Yeah. Obviously, why improve when you can use the time to sell, right? This is often the mindset.
That's exactly. Jim, in this hour, I could have sold something. You better give me something good, buddy.
Yeah. And they're right. It needs to be high class, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally correct. So let's go to the next stage, because now finally we moved very fast to a lot of years, but in 2015, you joined the SCRM Consortium.
Yes.
And since then are also helping with strategic moves and also do content together with Greg. So you talked a little bit of what inspired that move, but can you maybe share more about what you are doing and how exactly you two came to really work on this together?
Yeah, I think it culminated in the beginning. I was more periphery. And then probably 2019, we started working really closely together. 2015, we were loosely working together. We both had our own companies and we would be sitting on each other's boards, so to speak, to help each other. For myself, I was starting Enhance International Group, which is more encompassing people, process, data, technology. And of course, Greg is focused on supply chain risk management. So we started doing webinars together. And I think that's really where it started, and helping him formulate his offerings in a way from a marketing perspective and getting it out there and helping them on the marketing side. And that's what I do with all my partners what that help is I help them from the marketing perspective through the webinars and marketing collateral. And then with that came new product, new service development with Greg is, okay, well, how are you selling this today? How can we sell it different tomorrow? I think one thing that changed from, I'd say 2015 or 2014 or even 2010 to 2020 is supply chain risk management. Nobody had heard of it in 2015. The companies that he was mainly working were exemplars. Well, by 2021, 2022, most exemplars he had helped. And we all know about big companies. Once they get the message, they internalize it and they kind of disappear off the radar screen. So I came in 2021, 2022 and saying, okay, well, we have to change what we're doing and go after a different audience, because the exemplars that are all in the top 10, 15 companies are doing supply chain risk management. There, you might get a few of those, but we need to start working on the smaller, mid-sized companies. And how do we get the word out? So that's really where we got started. And we started developing. The first project we worked on was the supply chain risk and resiliency assessment. He had already had the supply chain readiness assessment. I helped him get that onto a platform. And we got that on a platform, and then we built a supply chain risk and resiliency assessment and get it up on a platform so it's free and user. And now we're working on a new offering, which is the Trust Acceleration Index. So we're coming up with new products and services. And Greg is a great guy because he says, let's make it free. He wants to share. He's not looking to make money off a simple assessment, but he really believes that people need to be educated in supply chain, in risk management, and now trust.
Yeah, because it's also, in comparison, still a very new field, and maturity is very low because there's only a handful of people that really know supply chain risk management inside out.
Yes.
And companies are still struggling to adopt it. And I think the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium, one of your main goals is to drive maturity of the market for supply chain risk management.
Well said.
Yeah. So if you look at that, what in your own point of view, no Greg involved right now.
Sure.
What are the top 3 low-hanging fruits for driving supply chain risk management forward in companies these days?
Yeah. And I think Greg would say the same thing. It has to start with education. Education of not only supply chain risk management, but supply chain. We always say, if you can't spell supply chain management, you can't even address supply chain risk management. And a lot of companies within their 4 walls, they're using terms that are ingrained in their culture that aren't congruent with supply chain management principles. And they have customer service, and they have procurement and operations and transportation all speaking different languages. And until they speak the same language, I don't know how you can apply supply chain risk management effectively. There's pieces, of course, you can cherry pick things, but the ability to sustain supply chain risk and resilience in your company is greatly diminished because you don't have a single language across your company. And since supply chain management is your whole company, it's just like Lean Six Sigma. It has a lot of the same similarities. The whole idea is Lean Six Sigma, although it's to optimize, it's to get everybody to speak a single language in your company. And if your company doesn't have a single language of supply chain management, then you don't have that continuity and communication is key, right? Speed is life. If I say a word and you interpret it as something totally different than the way that we call it in our department, wow, that's a problem. You got to fix that first. So language is key. It's just like any society. You got to have to speak the same language. And even in Europe, How many languages are there? A dozen languages, easy, right? And I was just speaking to somebody the other day, and they said, until Europe has one unified language and they speak it every day, it's going to be hard for Europe to really come together to be a unified front. It's hard to argue that.
Okay, so unifying the language is first. I just tried to summarize for myself.
Well, I'll just say that's the first thing. I'm sorry, it was
Okay.
long-winded. The second thing is process. You have to have your processes mapped. And in today's world, you can map the processes very easily electronically, but you have to have that end-to-end look of your supply chain within your four walls and outside your four walls. And especially in the risk resiliency world, you have to be able to go all the way upstream to the raw materials and downstream to the end customer. And if you don't have a picture of that, and that's not embedded in your culture, then you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. So how many people are doing jobs that they don't know why they're doing it because they don't know who the customer is or what they're doing? It's not just upstream. It's not just upstream raw material. It's downstream. Even you're on the factory floor and you're on an assembly line, and I go, yeah, why do you put that in there? Well, I don't know. I just started one day, stopped doing to see if anybody would notice because it would save me 5 minutes. Meanwhile, there's a bunch of rework being done downstream because this one operator decided not to do it because they didn't understand why they had to put it in that slot. It's no different on a factory floor than it is in a supply chain of vendors and OEMs. It's just no different. There is a reason for everything, but if people don't understand the reason, they're not going to do the right thing. So that's the second thing. And then I would just move on to technology. Implementing technology before you understand people and process is a waste of time. I see it every day. Everybody wants the magic button. The biggest mistake in digitalization, remember the internet boom, now it's digitization, now it's AI. Again, they say 90% of everything fails. It's all because of the same old reason. Is people process. And they go, well, I thought AI would circumvent people and process. No, I'm sorry. You need to do the people process first.
Yeah.
So those
That's
are the
well
three
said,
things.
yeah. These are very good three things. I love it. And yeah, a lot of AI projects are failing because we're looking for the silver bullet once again. The hype cycle is real.
Yeah.
Okay. So I found in your bio one thing that I found very interesting, and that was in the many publications you did over the years, right? You're very efficient in writing. In the many publications you did, one of them was actually a risk. Are you comfortable discussing with your company? That was in 2008, right?
So that was an whole article.
Between 2018, between
Yeah,
2018 and today, a few things happened, right? So do you think these days, I call it post-COVID, okay? Is it easier to win the hearts and minds, and are people more comfortable discussing risk than back in the days? Or do you think this article still holds on?
I think the article holds on. It's amazing when you read it. I think you did pick a good article because people are scared to talk about risk.
Mm-hmm.
Now risk is a word that's used, but it's saturated in the marketplace and people don't really internalize it. So yeah, risk is, you're talking about it, see it on the Sunday, you see it on the news every day. Risk this. But I don't think that folks are really internalizing what it means. And it's always the other side of the street has risk, not we don't have it, in the ownness of it. And people are scared of risk, where risk needs to be an opportunity. We all know the exemplars look at risk and they're licking their chops because they're like, this is great. Everybody thinks risk is bad. We're taking it to the limit and we're just capitalizing on it. So all the exemplars take risk that way. It's very clear. And most companies look at risk as they become risk averse and they want to protect their companies. And U.S. companies are very risk averse. more than any other country, I would say. And we're protectionists, and we're turning more protectionists. And as a company, and it's the guilty pleasure of a company that stops growing. And because they said, we're 10 million, we're 100 million, we're 1 trillion, we don't have to take risks anymore. And they're complacent. And complacency is the worst thing that could ever happen to your company. That's the highest risk there is when you're trying to protect your assets. Your competitors are looking for you to say that. And the way that we were able to grow at GE in the 90s faster than our competitors was we were willing to take on risks. Smart risks, but use it as an opportunity. Mm-hmm. So I think it still plays. You can still see the bifurcation today.
Yeah. I think it often comes down to people using risk as a scare and not talking about other core concepts like the risk appetite, right? Because there should be risks you should take, and there might be some risks you shouldn't take, right? Child labor is one of the risks you probably shouldn't take.
Of course.
Rightfully so.
I mean, you have to have ethics. You have to have your ethics and integrity and your values. So if you don't know what your values of your company are, if you talk to I always say, first, if you speak to the people on the floor and they don't know what the values are, then you're not an effective leader. You have to drill your values into your company. But it's not just the employees. Your customers need to know what your values are, and your suppliers. And if they don't understand, your ecosystem doesn't understand your values, then you're not even ready to take on risk. I'm sorry. Again, it starts with leadership.
Yeah. So supply chain risk management, as so many things, start with leadership. But now we want to go from starting something into the future, and that is the future of supply chain risk management. So what do you think the future will hold for supply chain risk management?
I think we need to figure out how to get everybody educated, right, in supply chain. Now, the good news is supply chain is now in a curriculum, and so there's a new generation of supply chain folks that are learning supply chain right out of college. Record numbers in the U.S. for sure. So now we have to follow that up with supply chain risk management. So that's one thing. And what we're focusing on, Greg and I, is on trust. And we believe that relationship and trust up and down the supply chain is key, because where there's trust, you can gain speed. If I don't trust you, then we're going to have to go back 3 times to share information. But if I trust you, it's a one-way, boom, you're going to take my word and you're going to run with it, and we're going to go. So we need to really work on trust. And the only way that the U.S. can be effective in the future is with trust. The U.S., Europe, all of our allies against BRICS, so to speak, only way we're going to be effective is if we trust each other, because they're authoritative. So people don't have any rights. So they have speed. We don't have any speed because we don't trust each other. So we got to fix that. So that's really what we think we need to work on with all of our trusted partners in our supply chains in the quote, quote, free world, whatever you want to call it, and whoever countries are in that, because that's always debatable. But again, we need to establish that so we can be as fast. From a scalability, China is so much larger and we're so much smaller, but we consume more per person. So we're ahead of the game now, but that's not going to always be. And so we need to figure out how to drive that speed in our supply chains, and trust is going to be the key.
Yeah, good take. You have an insane amount of knowledge, as we see in this podcast, by the way, and a big variety of topics, but you now take all your knowledge and focus on helping customers not only supply chain risk management, but in general, transform their businesses and change things they're doing right now. That's a focus of your consulting. So for me, a very important topic here and a concept is the ability to change behaviors, right? And to enable change. And that's something you're very good at. So what would you describe your fundamental approach of enabling change?
I think you have to know who you are first. When you're in change, you have to, and everybody in the room needs to. So we use a tool. You can use different, Myers-Briggs was the traditional tool. Now there's predictive index and there's other tools, but you have to understand who you are from a change management perspective. I'll be very honest. When I took predictive index, I did it, and then I'm a promoter. I'm like, I don't know if I like that or not. You think about the guy with the megaphone and so forth. And what does that mean? People that are mavericks or people that are different adapters. There's no right or wrong. It's just who you are. And you should embrace who you are. And when you embrace who you are, you can be effective. And you talk about leaders, even to be a leader, you have to embrace who you are. And from a change perspective, you need to get everybody in the room to embrace who they are, which is the trick, and not be scared of that. And then embrace diversity in the change. If you have a bunch of mavericks in the room, what do you think is going to happen? If you have a bunch of adapters in the room, is anything going to happen? So it's all about that cross-pollination of folks to go and make that change, whatever that change would be, to improve. So you need the leadership, and you need the people to understand their strengths and weaknesses and how to help each other through that change of that improvement or that transformation, whatever you have. So those are the fundamentals. I mean, there's the many different change processes that are known out there. The change acceleration process, GE, which I espouse to, everything's based around that. There's other change, they're all good. ProC has very good process. They're probably one of the best change management companies out there. So but the whole idea is you don't want to bring in a psychologist to run your change program. Too many change programs are run by psychologists. Nothing against psychologists, and they're good to have on there. But what you need are people that have actually led change, who are in the business, in their practitioner change agents. And that's what I see missing, is when companies say, oh, we do change management. And I say, you're a 10,000 people company. How many change managers do you have? We have 3. Doesn't make a sense. Every employee should be a change agent, and everybody has the ability to drive change, and you should teach those skills. When you do that, wow, what you get out of productivity is beyond. So everybody says, what's that 10 to 20% increase in productivity you get? Is when everybody's empowered to make change in your company, you're going to see an incredible increase in productivity of your company that you would never even imagine. And it's sustainable because everybody has that power. And you look at entrepreneurial companies that are growing like crazy. When they're small and they're growing like crazy, everybody can do change, and they're taking risks on left and right? What do big companies do? They stymie everything and say, they put everybody in the pigeonholes and say, you will do this, and this. And then they say, well, why aren't we innovative anymore? Why can't we grow? Well, you've created a culture of stagnation, and stagnation does not equal growth.
Yeah. And they talk about, I don't know how it's in America, but in Germany, they often talk about the oil tanker, right? So if you're a big company, you're the old oil tanker that doesn't really move, cannot turn so fast anymore. And that's
absolutely
a dangerous analogy. If you're in an oil tanker,
you don't want to be the oil tanker. You want to be the fast attack boats or whatever. You need to have a fleet. You need to have everything. And you need to have a balance of the stability to manage the products that you're making your core money on, but you need to also always have a group of people that are focused on thinking out of the box and And you should find out, are you an out of the box thinker or do it consistently all the time? There's nothing wrong with the people who are doing it because we need those people, but we also need the mavericks. We need to put them in the right job. When you put a maverick in a job on the assembly line, they go insane. And they say, why is Frankie going insane on the assembly line? He's a maverick. They said, well, fire him. No, find Frankie the job that he can do, and he can help your company. Everybody has a place in the company. Very rarely do we choose the right careers. Very rare.
And that's why it's good for you, because you have so many different experiences and
I've tried them all, so
yeah, it's good.
I failed a lot.
No, well, that's good, right? I mean, you started as an engineer and then went so far and so different, and that's good. I started studying Chinese and economics, went into supply chain management, and now I'm sales. So it's always
It's
not
always a journey, right?
straight line. Yeah, it's a journey with many different twists and turns. So my last real question before my really final question is, I saw on LinkedIn in your recommendations a lot of people praising your leadership skills. And they talk about you being a leader with a broad range of experiences, which I can only agree on. We heard a lot today. And that you are really able to inspire the teams. And you talked a little bit already about you have to know yourself, but do you have a strategy to go out and do a good meeting to really get the troops rallied behind you, or is it just a natural behavior?
It's very flattering. I appreciate it. I would say my leadership style is to promote, because I'm a promoter and I want to see the best come out of everyone else. And I don't want to command and control. I don't believe in command and control, because when I leave the room, they need to keep going. So I'm not a micromanager. I'm pretty anti-micromanagement. I'm very comfortable with people doing it different ways to get to the end. And as a leader, I think most effective leaders they say, Jim, I remember them saying, Jim, I never thought about doing it that way, but that was really cool what you did. That was inspiring to me to hear that. And that's what I try to base my thoughts on. It's like, geez, Jerry, I never thought of it that way. Or Greg or whoever it is that I'm working with, I say, I just never thought of it that way. And thank God you're coming up with something that I would have never come up with. And I like it. Let's try it and be open to try, because it's only with trying that you can fail, and only in failing that you learn. And that's the way you grow. You don't grow always doing it the right way. And I have ways to do things, and they might not be. I think over the deployments, they would say, Jim, you deployed this way, and said, how are you guys we had to figure out a way for everybody else to deploy using the same principles. And I think that taught me that I had to learn to allow people to do it a different way and end up with just as good a results, or maybe even better results. So those are my principles. That helps.
Yeah, that's good. That's spoken like a disciple of a book around growth mindset. So that's very cool. Before we started, actually, I'm breaking the fourth wall a little bit. We had a short discussion around books, and I really appreciated this. So because I understand that you're a passionate reader around business and so on and so forth. My last question would be, if you have to recommend one book right now that would help people drive forward their ability on change management and leadership, what would the book be and why?
I think I'll grab it here.
Good.
Grab it by this book here.
Mm-hmm.
Humankind. I think Rector really, he nailed it as far as humankind has made me feel optimism in a time of pessimism, which we live in right even now. He's ahead of a time. It's an exceptional read, was what a person wrote. This is really a great book. We have hope. Right now, The world sounds like it's going to die, but we have to trust in humankind, in each other. Everybody innately in their hearts wants to do the right thing. And again, it goes back to those principles I said before, is we might not agree on how Trump runs or how Kamala runs or how whoever is, or Macron, whoever it is. We may not agree with what they are doing, but their heart is in the right place. And as long as your heart's in the right place, we're going to get there. And we just got to trust in each other. And that's why I love the focus that we have on trust today.
Cool. Very good answer. I love that. And with that, actually, Jim, we're at the end of this podcast. I have to say it was very inspiring to me. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
That's good. Thank you. And for everybody who is listening, watching, or however you're enjoying this podcast, I'm going to do a YouTube thing, like and subscribe. If you're still here, that would be great. Thank you so much. And otherwise, have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. And with that, we're going to say bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
This was Supply Chain Pioneers. Thanks for watching, listening, or however you are enjoying this podcast. You can find Supply Chain Pioneers on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all other major podcast players, as well as on YouTube at Ulf Talk Supply Chain. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. See you next time.